Greetings, gamers! Welcome to the 8th installment of my Dissecting Rogue Deck series, going over yet again another Mega Monarch. I have two left, one today and one for the next episode. Without further ado, let's get into it. Granmarg, a very interesting monarch, and probably unanimously the worst of the Mega Monarchs and the worst of the original Monarchs. And the reason why is because his trigger effect is relative to what is on the field. In other words, set cards. I still think he's fun. I actually think he's a lot of fun, especially if you build the deck correctly. He can really kind of like turn the tides going second against certain decks. Frankly, because of some of the traps in this deck, you would almost think, or particularly one of the traps in this deck, you would almost think he was a going first deck because you would really want that to be set first. Your opponent goes second, your opponent attack into it. I only have one of those in this deck, and I'm not really relying on it. Monarchs are in it for the long haul. This is something that is true of most instances and most times you're playing with Monarchs. You're going to play for turn and turn and turn and turn. And the reason why you're going to play for multiple turns is because Monarchs slow the game down. If you're playing correct versions of the Monarchs, right? You're playing Domain Lock, you're playing any kind of stun like Erupt or so on and so forth, you're slowing the game down. And you're making it so that the opponent has to basically play old school Yu-Gi-Oh with you. And if you're playing that way, Monarchs are granted for the long haul. The issue is that because most of the Mega Monarchs aren't running Domain, nor could they utilize Domain, they're not really going to get any benefit out of playing for the long haul. I still have stuff for it. So you'll notice that I have a lot more going second tools for his effect rather than going first tools. So Lucius the Shadow Vassal is amazing for Granmarg. Probably the most important Mega Monarch for his effect is because if he's tributed over, he gives you a spell speed 4, look into your opponent's set spells and traps, and you get to destroy those. The thing is that Granmarg doesn't just destroy set spells and traps. He destroys any set card on the field. And that's pretty powerful, that's pretty fun, and it can be pretty interesting because the way this works is that those cards don't normally necessarily have to activate, right? It just depends on what the card is. So 3 Adea the Heavenly Squire, 3 Ados the Underworld Squire. I have 2 Landrobe the Rock Vassal. So I think it's beneficial to have 2 Landrobe. Landrobe is basically another version of Book of Moon for this deck, but it's not a quick play. But it is a special summon for him. So if your opponent has monsters, which is very likely because you're going to be going second and your opponent's going first, you can put your opponent's monster face down defense. Obviously this doesn't work against link monsters and unaffected monsters, but you know, there is that. Landrobe is still pretty good, all things considered, for the effects of this deck. I have 2 regular Granmarg. If this card is tribute summoned, target 1 set card on the field, destroy that target. So this is the beginning of that effect. 1 set card on the field, destroy that target. This was never good, even in its heyday. A lot of people who would use this monster would use him as like a side deck option. If you did, Mobius is better. Mobius has pretty much always been better. Of course, there is the importance of during this time and before this time, around the time that Granmarg, the Rock Monarch, was created, that flip effects of monsters were pretty darn good, and destroying them without necessarily getting the flip effect sometimes is good, but it just really kind of depends, because I think many flip effects would still go off with this destruction because it's not a send. If it's sent to the grave rather than destroyed, the card wouldn't have to be flipped face up, which is pretty interesting. I have 1 Kiraz the Light Monarch. I have 2 Kamungus the Sticky String Kaiju. This is the Earth monster kaiju that goes along with the attribute of Granmarg, because again, Granmarg the Mega Monarch is like every other Mega Monarch in that he wants to be tributed over, he wants to tribute summon over an Earth monster of his same attribute, just like the others want to be tributed a monster of their same attribute. The reason being is because they get an extra effect. For him, he targets up to 2 set cards on the field, not spells, but set cards on the field, destroy those targets. And if he's distributed over an earth monster, he gets to also allow you to draw 1 card afterwards, which is pretty darn cool. I think the draw, the way it's worded here, is guaranteed as long as he's tributed over a monster, even if he doesn't destroy any set spells and traps, which is pretty good. I don't know this for a fact because, you know, you have to find this exact instance for this to be a known fact for you, and I don't look up rulings. I don't care about any of that stuff. I have 1 Ether, the Heavenly Monarch, 1 Erebus, and I have 2 Gamma Seal. So typically in these decks, I go for the weakest kaiju that I can put in the deck that isn't the attribute. So there's only 1 of every attribute for each kaiju except for Light. Light has 2 attributes. It's the reason why Zaborg is a bit spoiled in that matter. And especially because the 2 Light kaijus are the strongest attack point wise, and you're going to destroy one of them right off rip. So you could potentially end up putting yourself in a game-winning situation with Zaborg where you OTK, because you can get rid of your opponent's field of monsters with like Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. You give him Jizukuru, you give yourself Thunder King, you destroy Jizukuru with your Zaborg, you destroy his spells and traps with like Elder Entity, you get Ruin on the field, you're just attacking for 1 billion damage, your opponent can't really do anything. It's pretty fun. Now, is it going to happen against a modern meta deck? No. Just like how Granmarg isn't really good against modern meta anything. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun. 1 Pot of Avarice. You're going to pretty much see Pot of Avarice and Jar of Avarice in every one of my 4 fun decks because, again, I love recursion, and this just gives you that, and it also gives you draw power with that recursion, which is just fun. I actually think, in my humble opinion, Pot of Avarice is way stronger than something like Pot of Desires. The only thing that makes Pot of Desires stronger is that you can use Pot of Desires on turn 1, right? But Pot of Avarice recurs your monsters from your grave back into your deck and then draws you 2. You don't lose anything for this. The only thing you could technically lose is graveyard effects. If you're not running graveyard effects or you don't care, this is just a non-issue. So of course it is weaker in the sense that it can't go first. You can't really go first with Pot of Avarice or Jar of Avarice for sure, but there's still fun recursion. I have 3 Tenacity of Monarchs, 3 Pantheism of the Monarchs, 2 Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. And then I have 3 Swords of Concealing Light. But destroy this card during your second standby phase after activation. When this card resolves, change all monsters your opponent controls to face down defense position. Monsters your opponent controls cannot change their battle positions. So this just gives you a way to destroy your opponent's field. And because I'm using the Monarch Storm Forth, let's say my opponent has like 3 monsters on the field. I activate this. I have a monster on the field like Eidos or Idea. I summon those, get those to the field, blah, blah, blah. And then I use Storm Forth. I steal one of my opponent's monsters to summon Granmarg. And then I can destroy his other 2 monsters with Granmarg because they're set. That's pretty fun. I'm not saying it's powerful, but it is pretty fun. And I have a lot of ways to set my opponent's cards, especially monsters. I have March of the Monarchs. I have Return of the Monarchs. I have 3 Book of Moon, so target 1 face-up monster on the field. Change that target to face-down defense position. So this is actually a tech card more than it is just generic face-down defense. I've spoken about this before, but the Monarchs actually really want Book of Moon in the deck alongside like Called by the Grave because it would protect your Idea the Heavenly Squire or your Eidos, their effects from being impermed or effect veilered by turning them face down because they would still get their effects. Doesn't seem like they should because they're being set face down, but their effects still resolve because it's when they're summoned. It's if they're summoned, I should say. If this card is normal summoned, if this card is normal or special summoned. Both of them are normal or special summoned, they get their effects as long as they're not negated. So Book of Moon doesn't negate your effects. It just puts your monster face down. I have 3 Monarch Storm Forth, 1 Awaken, 1 Jar of Avarice, 1 Quaking Mirror Force. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, change all your opponent's attack position monsters to face down defense position. Monsters changed to face down defense position by this effect cannot change their battle positions. So what's crazy about this, with both this card as well as Swords of Concealing Light, and even Book of Moon to some lesser extent, is that your opponent cannot link summon, synchro summon. I don't even think your opponent can fusion summon, or like pretty much any extra deck play off of a face down defense position monster he controls, because that monster is not known by name at the current time. It's just face down. It's like when you're playing with kaijus. This is something I'm going to get to show off when I show off my kaiju decks. If you put your opponent's kaiju to face down defense position after you've given him a kaiju, you can give him yet again another kaiju, even though he has a kaiju on the field. Even though the kaijus literally say in their card text, you can only control 1 kaiju. Face down defense means that your opponent doesn't necessarily know what it is, so it's not considered controlled. It's very weird how these things work. It's actually one of the things I would change about my own personal card game, and I've been speaking about this, but I do absolutely want to eventually get my own card game in the running, which is a hilarious thought to think about, but it's something that I would love to do. I would not have face down position for cards in my card game. Maybe for what I would consider spells and traps in that game, but definitely not for monsters. Monsters would just have 1 position that's attack position. They would just have one stat. They wouldn't have 2 stats. They wouldn't have any of this. And the reason why is because it would simplify a lot of necessity for certain rulings and stuff like that. And it would take an entire function out of the game that realistically no longer needs to be there, right? Yu-Gi-Oh! Hasn't needed face down defense position since, like, I don't know, 2002. So realistically speaking, it's just something that I would cut the fluff of out of the game, in my humble opinion. I have 1 Monarchs Erupt, just fantastic skill drain for Monarchs. You can run this at 3. In fact, I have a deck that runs this at 3. It's just not Monarchs, which is a very funny thought. I have 1 Escalation of the Monarchs, so that if, in fact, I'm going first, I could still summon my Granmarg and disrupt my opponent's plays. So this is why I've said before that all of the Mega Monarchs can run first if you build them a certain way. You could run them with like 3 Escalation of the Monarchs so that you're pretty much guaranteed to get it in your hand. Or even without 3 Escalation, as long as you're running the Pantheism and Tenacity sort of engine, and you have enough Monarch spells and traps in your deck, you're going to basically guarantee that you're going to get them into your hand. And then you're going to be able to get Escalation into your hand if you run it at 3, because you could reveal it with Pantheism, and your opponent has to pick it. It means that you could do a lot of different disruptions. The cards like Mobius, Ryza, Caius, and Granmarg, they work really great with Escalation because of the fact that they have disruption, but it just depends on what your opponent is playing. Because if he knows to expect this, if you've already played Granmarg, now he couldn't necessarily fully guarantee that you're going to play a pure Granmarg deck like mine currently is right now, but there is that chance that you would just be able to disrupt your opponent's spells, traps, your defense position monsters, face down defense position monsters your opponent controls, or let's say your opponent attacks and he has 5 monsters on the field. You activate Quaking Mirror Force. You could have 3 of those in this deck if you wanted. And then you use Escalation of the Monarchs to summon over your cards, and then you can destroy his monsters. So that's pretty great too. It's fun. It's fun. Granmarg is probably, like I said, the weakest of the Mega Monarchs, but he has a lot of fun potential, especially with things like Swords of Concealing Light, Quaking Mirror Force, Book of Moon, so on and so forth. And the last card in my deck is the Prime Monarch. This has been my showcase. I'm going to go ahead and give you the demonstration. Going second is always what you want to do with this deck using Granmarg. Like I said before, and I explained moments ago, you can absolutely run this as a going second or a going first deck, depending on what you use and what you do. And there was some thought in my mind about making some of the Mega Monarch decks going first decks with stuff like Escalation, but I have a lot of going first decks, a lot. In fact, out of my 35 decks, I would say only about maybe a third to 40% of my decks are going second. So I think that's perfectly fine. Now, what I could do here is activate March of the Monarchs. Monarch Storm 4th. I'm going to summon Idea. And Ados. Now, with this, I actually want to summon Ether. You and maybe Ados. Let's set up my grave. Pantheism. Prime Monarch, of course. And then I'm going to summon Granmarg to the field. I'm going to banish Pantheism. And I think not Awakening. Any one of these would be fine. Perfect. Now I can go ahead and destroy my opponent's monster. That's a bit unfortunate. Attack right into it. I'm going to leave battle phase. I'm going to set Book of Moon face down, go to end phase. Granmarg, the Mega Monarch, comes to my hand, which is fine. So Curaz is interesting. A lot of people don't really understand the point of Curaz. Curaz is basically like a functional... He's basically supposed to be a combination monarch. There's actually 3 monarchs that are combination monarchs of the lesser monarchs. Curaz is one of them. And Curaz is a combination of Granmarg, the original Granmarg, and the original Zaborg. It's very interesting. And of course I'm going to use this effect now. I would love to draw more. Don't really need Prime Monarchs in my grave because I have a pretty good setup. I have my extenders. Doesn't matter if my field is wiped. I'm still going to get Granmarg summoned. So there is that. Battle phase. I could let this go off because then I would get my Pantheism. I think I'm going to. Pantheism in my hand. And then he's going to summon a monster from his hand. Ooh. Face down defense position with you, buddy. Now, I can go ahead and banish Ados, summon Idea, and then I can use her effect to summon Landrobe, which is pretty much perfect, because then I can summon Granmarg off of... Oh, not you. Both of these two. I'm going to get to destroy both of these cards. And then I'm going to get the effects of all of this going on. I'm going to grab Erebus to my hand, as well as I can bring Idea to my hand. What's cool about bringing Idea to my hand is that I no longer have an Ados in my graveyard, and I don't have an Idea in my hand as it is. So I can use her next turn for whatever plays I have further. And then, the crazy thing about it is Heavy Metal Raiders is actually a very annoying field spell here. The only way to really deal with it is I would have to use my Book of Moon here and put down his monster and then go into attacking. It's going to live the first hit, unfortunately. So I have to defeat this Heavy Metal Raiders next turn. I have Kiraz, and that's exactly what I'm going to be doing with Kiraz. I have a pretty darn decent setup for my field. I mean, I really don't even need to destroy that now, honestly. But now I can go ahead and use Pantheism because I don't really need escalation. And I could even banish Pantheism to grab, let's say, no, not you. Monarchs erupt. That's perfectly fine. Now it is time to summon Idea and get my last Eidos to the field. This is the problem with drawing into Eidos. You actually really do not want to draw into Eidos in any of these decks. Magical Mallet is something I've honestly thought of as being a pretty good tech card for Monarchs because it allows you to... A lot of people don't like Magical Mallet, right? Because you're not really going plus. It's not a draw card. People don't understand what Magical Mallet is. It is a mulligan card. Mulligans are kind of really important for a deck like Monarchs because look at this. Let's say I drew this hand, except for minus Kiraz. Let's say I drew all three of my Granmargs, or in fact, let's just say 2 Granmargs, 1 Ether, 1 Erebus, and 1 Kaiju. If my opponent doesn't have a monster on his field, I can literally do nothing. And even if he does have a monster on his field, I can Kaiju 1 monster, big deal. That's not really all that useful or that great, honestly speaking. So of course, I'm going to get Erebus on the field because Erebus is awesome. My favorite of the Monarchs in general. I could go ahead and grab a regular Granmarg. That'd be pretty interesting. And then grab you to my hand. I can reset up my graveyard with some Monarch spells and traps so that I can start using the Prime Monarch's effect again. Doesn't matter realistically what I send. And sure, I'm going to take a card from your hand and throw it in the grave. Why? Because that's fun. Not fun for you, but it is definitely fun for me. And I'm going to use this effect, so both these cards go back into my deck. So one thing that it was asking me right there is if I wanted to use the effect of the Prime Monarch. This is something that I have not really encountered yet before in a video. So if you have 3 Monarch spells and traps in the graveyard, and you use the Prime Monarch as a trap to recur 2 of those cards, and one of those 3 happens to be the Prime Monarch, you can banish one of those cards to special summon your Prime Monarch from the graveyard. As long as one of the cards goes back to the grave, you'll still get the draw from the Prime Monarch. It's really cool. And it's not something at all that you would expect would be an interaction, especially with how limiting a lot of cards are in Yu-Gi-Oh! But it is exactly how that works, and it is the interaction of the hour. So of course, Granmarg, you're going to get the last hit. I actually really wish that the Monarchs had attacking animations, and more of them had summon animations, like Erebus. Erebus and the original Caius, the Shadow Monarch, are the only 2 that have summon animations. It makes sense because they're the most important. Erebus is the most important modern monarch, whereas Caius is the most important old school monarch, but I still think that more of them could use it, especially Ether, because Ether is the queen of the Monarchs. I think she should definitely get something of that sort. But with that being said, I want to thank you for joining me. If you like my content, please upvote and follow, or like and subscribe, leave a comment down below, and while you're at it, have a great and glorious day gaming.